Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Just Law on IQRA TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia. Just before our break, we were looking at immigration matters, in particular spouse applications, and we get a number of calls normally in relation to that. And what we were looking at in greater detail was this financial requirement that has to be met by somebody who wants to sponsor their husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. And no doubt you've heard a lot about, the income has to be 18,600 per year. So that's what the sponsor needs to be earning in order to sponsor their husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. Now, what I was looking at in particular today was the circumstances in which that 18,600 requirement does not have to be met. And in particular, we were looking at where the sponsor in the United Kingdom is in receipt of certain benefits, certain disability benefits. It could be DLA, it could be PIP, or it could be carer's allowance where somebody is caring for a disabled person. So we're looking at people who are in receipt of certain benefits. And because they're in receipt of certain benefits, they are then eligible for an exemption from the 18,600 requirement. Now, one of the things that I was looking at was that, the fact that they are in receipt of these benefits does mean that they are exempt from the 18,600 requirement, but it doesn't mean that there is no other hurdles that they need to get over. Just simply being in receipt of the benefits is not enough. They still need to have enough money coming in to be able to look after themselves and to look after their husband or wife who comes over to the United Kingdom without recourse to public funds. And in the rules, they talk about the sponsor being in receipt of adequate maintenance. And it's really a question of what does this adequate maintenance mean? So it's not a fixed 18,600, which is the normal case. What they look at is whether the income is adequate or not. And really, in order to determine that, one has to look at the sponsors, the applicant's individual circumstances. And I'll come on to look at the kind of factors that you look at. But in essence, the starting point is receipt of these qualifying benefits. And there are certain things that you can add on to that in terms of your employment, income, etc. There are benefits that you can add on to that because there's no restriction on being able to add benefits on top of that. So if somebody might be in receipt of working tax credits, child tax credits, they can include that as income. Certain circumstances you can include income support or not. So the rule is actually quite flexible. Once you fall within the exemption, the kind of income source that you can rely on is significantly different to the 18,600 requirement, which is very strict, where basically your income is your earned income. Whereas when you fall within the exemption, you can look at a whole host of different types of income. Potentially public funds also qualify as permitted sources of income. So you can add to your disability benefits, working tax credits, child tax credits, income support, employment income, etc. So the sort of range of income, the range of benefits that you can take into account is significantly more varied, more flexible than what you would take into account for normal applications under the 18,600 rule. So that's basically the position. You look at whether you fall within whether you receive these certain benefits or not. You look at how much money do you have coming in total. And then essentially what you're trying to look at is whether, in light of all that, whether it can be argued or it can be it's clear that the income amounts to adequate maintenance or not. And in order to determine that, you have to look at each situation or based on its own set of circumstances. There's no fixed level of income that you look at. So you don't simply say whether, as long as you're earning £1,000 a month, it's okay. If you're earning £2,000 a month, it's okay. You don't do that. You simply look at each individual circumstances. And essentially, there is some logic behind this, because essentially what you're looking at is how much will the sponsor and the applicant, how much will they need to live on in the United Kingdom. So you could have a situation where on one side of this spectrum you've got somebody, husband and wife, no children, they're living with potentially will be living with parents in the United Kingdom, so they've got no rental costs, they've got no council tax to pay. So it's just a couple, husband and wife, no rent to pay, no council tax to pay. So on the one hand, you've got that kind of scenario, and on the other hand, you may have a husband and wife, let's say they've got 2 or 3 kids, and they've got rent to pay, they've got council tax to pay. So it's both set of circumstances are different. And what the rules basically say is that the level of income that will be required for those different sets of circumstances is going to be different. And there's obviously logic in that. Husband and wife, a couple, basically will need less money to live on, whereas a couple with children with commitments in relation to rent, mortgage, council tax will need a lot more money to live on if they are not going to be a further burden on the state. So just on that point, it's not a problem that the sponsor receives these benefits. The problem is that there shouldn't be an additional burden on the state once the applicant comes to the United Kingdom. So on the one hand, they will take your benefits into account when you're working out what your income is, but they won't allow you to take into account any additional benefits you may receive as a result of the husband or wife coming over from abroad, because that will be an additional burden on the state. So that's basically not permitted. So let's take those 2 examples. You have a husband and wife who want to sponsor coming over, and that's what the adequate maintenance requirement for that is, and then the more other requirement where there's a bigger family, and we'll look at that. Let's take our call before we look at that in greater detail. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Islam.
Thank you for calling. What's your question?
But actually, inquiry. I've just come back from abroad 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I've just been married. And what is the procedure I need to go through to put in paperwork in?
All right. Okay. So you've just recently got married. Yep.
Yeah.
And if I can just take some very, very brief details from you, then I can run you through the kind of documents that you need to get together. In terms of your financial situation, are you working at the moment, or are you self-employed? What's basically the position at the moment?
I'm working at the moment.
Okay. And how long have you been working?
Just under 2 years.
About 2 years. Okay. And has that been with the same employer? So you've been working for 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay. And then just on the income front, you've been there working for 2 years. What kind of income do you have coming in, weekly or monthly? If you can give us an approximate figure in terms of the amount of...
I'm on monthly payment. Pay me just under £1,200.
Okay, all right, okay. And is that a gross figure you've given, or is that a net figure you've given us?
That's gross.
That's a gross figure, all right, okay. So just based on that, or sort of a rough estimation, that would come up to roughly about £14,500. Now, do you have any other source of income at all?
I do. I want to start doing some operating, but not. I haven't started at the moment, but I am going to start up.
All right. Okay. So potentially you're looking for some other source of income, another job as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the reason is normally I find in practice that if you can meet the financial requirement, you're sort of 80-90% there in terms of making a successful application for your husband or wife to join you in the United Kingdom. Now, looking at your income, you've got about £14,500 coming in. So we're short by about £4,000 a year, or roughly about £300 to £400 a week we're short by at the moment. So you have said that you're going to start looking for other work. It would be helpful for you to do that. Would you be able to get a second job where you get...
Yeah, this is what I wanted to ask you about. If I got a second job somewhere else, would that affect me by any way, or...?
That would certainly help you if you manage to get a second job, because the shortfall that we have in terms of your income, which is about £350 a month approximately, if you can get a second job which basically plugs that hole, and then combined you've got about 1550, 1560 coming in, that would be sufficient. So potentially that would be helpful. Now, before you go, what I should say is that if you do manage to find a job, you won't be able to apply straight away. You will need to wait about 6 months and do 6 months in that second job before you're able to apply. I mean, is that going to work for you? Potentially, you're going to have to wait for 6 months.
Yes, that should be fine. Yeah, with me waiting. Yeah.
Okay. All
Right,
right.
then she English done and stuff. If you could just briefly go through what needs to be done
Okay.
over by
Okay.
her my side, and then what I need to do here, please, and I'll just
Brilliant.
watch through.
No problem
Is
at
that
all.
okay?
Okay. Thank you very much. Jazakallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.
I'll just run through very quickly in terms of the spouse application. And a lot of the questions do relate to finances. I know we're talking about exemption from the 18,600 requirement today, but if we look at the normal requirement where somebody does need to be earning 18,600, it does mean roughly that you need to be earning about 1,550 a month. Potentially that's what you need to be earning. Now, just looking at that, the caller was saying from their sort of first job, a job that they've been doing for the last 2 years, there's an income of about £1,200 a month. So that falls short of the 18,600 requirement. So as long as there's a second job there, we can be used to supplement the income. It should be okay. The point I was making was that if there is a second job, he will have to work for 6 months in the second job before making the application, because it's not sufficient that you have one job where you've done 6 months of employment and then in the second job you do a couple of months and then make the application. That will potentially lead to the case being rejected. Both jobs need to have been undertaken for at least 6 months. There are exemptions to that, but in the Bob Standard case, the kind of matter that the caller was talking about, you do need to basically work for 6 months before applying. So that's basically the financial requirement. I'll just run through very quickly the other requirements that need to be fulfilled. From abroad, there are certain things that the applicant needs to do, which is obviously they need to pass the English test, the A1 life skills. They also need to complete the TB certificate. They need to be clear of TB and other medical complications such as that. The marriage, the caller was saying that they have got married, so obviously there'll be a nikah nama for that, and that obviously needs to be translated as well. So you've got the English certificate, the TB certificate, and the marriage certificate as well. That needs to be done. So potentially from abroad, there isn't really much more that we need. From here, you look at the financial requirement, and that's normally met by wage slips, bank statements, and an employer's letter. And I said, as I've said before, really the sponsor needs to be in employment for a period of 6 months. Then very quickly, in summary form, accommodation is then the other requirement which needs to be met. And it's if you're living with parents, then it's, you know, a copy of the deeds will be submitted, a housing report will be submitted showing whether there's sufficient space in the house or not for somebody to live in there, and also a letter from the owner of the house saying that you know, you and your husband or wife who's coming from abroad has permission to live there. So that's the accommodation requirement in a nutshell. And then finally, we're looking at the relationship. Obviously, as the caller was saying, that they're married. And that's obviously demonstrated by the marriage certificate. But the Home Office also wants to be assured that not only is the marriage valid, it's actually genuine and subsisting. So there are a number of documents that will be submitted in order to demonstrate that. For example, wedding photographs showing that a proper marriage has taken place. That helps to show that this is all genuine. There's no sham or marriage of convenience type of allegation is made against us. You know, the proper photographs, people invited, etc. So that shows that the marriage is genuine and not some kind of sham. I think more importantly, it's not normally that, it's more the evidence of the ongoing relationship which the Home Office wants to look at. Because as the caller was saying, he may need to wait approximately 6 months before he can sponsor his wife to come to the United Kingdom. So in those 6 months, the Home Office wants to know that the relationship has been maintained. And the evidence of that normally is there other evidence which shows that the relationship is subsisting. For example, are there telephone records which show that? Are there messages which confirm that? Is there a trip back to the home country where the husband or wife is, which shows that you've gone back to see your husband or wife, which again strengthens the argument that the relationship is subsisting. The general rule seems to be that where somebody has been married for about a year, it is expected that the person from the United Kingdom will go abroad to see their husband or wife. I mean, that is the minimum sort of level of contact that the Home Office will want to see. If somebody's been married just for 6 months and they make the application, they don't normally require evidence that somebody's gone back to see their husband or wife. But where they have been married for about a year, the Home Office does require evidence that somebody has gone back to see their husband or wife. So typically that's the evidence of the relationship. So very quickly, TB certificate, the English certificate, evidence of the income in terms of wage slips and bank statements meeting the 18,600 requirement, accommodation documents showing ownership of the property, property inspection report, etc. And importantly, finally, the relationship documents that you're talking, you're chatting on WhatsApp, etc. And if you've been married for a while, you know, the parties have met again, normally demonstrated by the sponsor in the United Kingdom basically going abroad. So that really in a nutshell is how a successful spouse application based on the 18,600 rule is met. Now, what I was looking at today was the exemption from the 18,600 rule. So it's where the applicant, the sponsor, doesn't have to be earning 18,600. And what I was looking at is in what circumstances are you exempt? And I highlighted the fact that if you're in receipt of certain disability benefits, you're in receipt of carers allowance, you're exempt. Just the fact that you're in receipt of these benefits is not enough. You do need to have enough money coming in so that you have adequate maintenance, basically enough money to look after yourself and your husband or wife who's coming over without recourse to additional funds. Now, what I was saying before we took the call was that there are, in terms of the amount of money you need to be earning, that really does vary. On the one hand, it could be a husband and wife simply applying, whereas on the other, it could be a husband and wife, 3 children, and they've got rent and council tax to pay. So the amount of income that you need coming in does vary. And after our short break, I do want to look at the kind of income that you need in these kind of circumstances. We'll just come back and deal with that after our short break.